Kaivan Holt had taken hundreds of calls in glass-walled conference rooms like this one. Calls that decided mergers, acquisitions, exits. Calls where men twice his age waited for his approval before finishing their sentences. He had learned long ago how to control a room without raising his voice. Control, for Kaivan, was a habit. That morning, the habit failed him. His phone vibrated once on the table. He ignored it. Important people waited for him, not the other way around. He kept speaking, outlining projected growth, his voice steady, confident, precise. The men across from him nodded, eyes focused, pens still. The phone vibrated again. Longer this time. Kaivan paused mid-sentence, barely noticeable, just enough to irritate him. He glanced at the screen. Another incoming call. Then another notification layered over it. He turned the phone face down, tightening his jaw, and continued speaking as if nothing had changed. Someone cleared their throat. "Kaivan," a voice said gently, too gently. He looked up. One of the board members had leaned back in his chair. Not Mr. Holt, not chairman, just Kaivan. That alone was wrong. "We should stop here," the man continued. "There's been a development." Kaivan smiled, the practiced kind that usually smoothed discomfort out of a room. "If this is about the risk assessment, it's already been addressed." The board member didn't return the smile. "It's not about projections." Another vibration cut through the silence. This time, Kaivan didn't ignore it. He lifted the phone, expecting urgency, irritation ready on his tongue. What he saw instead made his breath hitch. 3 missed calls from his lead investor, 2 messages from legal, a calendar notification disappearing from his screen as if it had never existed. Across the table, one of the men closed his folder. Slowly, deliberately. "We're stepping back," the board member said. "Effective immediately." Kaivan straightened. "You can't just step back. We already have." The room felt different now. Not hostile, not loud, simply closed. Conversations ended without argument, without explanation. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. No one asked for his approval. For the first time in years, Kaivan Holt felt something he couldn't name yet. Not panic, not fear, just the quiet recognition that something had moved without him noticing. And whatever it was, it had already passed the point of his control. Kaivan left the conference room without the usual entourage trailing behind him. No assistants rushing to keep pace. No junior partners asking what he needed next. The corridor outside felt wider than it ever had, quieter, as though the building itself had decided to keep its distance. His phone vibrated again in his hand. This time, he didn't silence it. A message preview flashed from legal. Short, formal, uncomfortably neutral. It didn't accuse him of anything. It didn't ask for clarification. It simply stated that certain authorizations had been suspended pending review. Suspended. That word lingered longer than it should have. Kaivan slowed his steps, his confidence thinning by degrees rather than breaking all at once. He opened another message, then another. Each one carried the same tone, careful, procedural, already decided. Meetings postponed, access restricted, conversations redirected through channels that no longer led back to him. He stopped walking. For years, Kaivan had believed power announced itself, that it arrived with confrontation, raised voices, public resistance. He had prepared for enemies who challenged him openly, not for adjustments made quietly, neatly, without drama. He scrolled further. A voicemail from his lead investor played automatically. The man's voice was polite, almost apologetic. He spoke about alignment, about fiduciary responsibility, about timelines changing. He never once said Kaivan's name with respect, never once asked for his input. The call ended without a promise to reconnect. Kaivan stared at the dark screen, irritation creeping in at the edges. Someone had overstepped. Someone had moved too fast. This was a misunderstanding, and misunderstandings could be corrected. He straightened his jacket and resumed walking, dialing numbers from memory. Each call rang longer than usual. One went unanswered. Another was redirected to an assistant who spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded rehearsed. "We'll get back to you," she said. They always did before, immediately. The phone vibrated again. This time, the notification wasn't from work. It was from home. A single message preview appeared before the screen dimmed. "We need to talk." Caven exhaled through his nose, irritation sharpening into certainty. Of course, this was Naira. Timing had never been her strength. She always chose moments when he was busy, distracted, dealing with matters larger than whatever dissatisfaction she had decided to revisit. He typed a quick response but stopped before sending it. Something about the wording felt wrong. Not emotional, not reactive, no accusations, no urgency. Just a statement. Caven deleted his reply and slipped the phone into his pocket, convincing himself he would deal with it later. Whatever tension existed at home could wait. He had more pressing concerns now. What he didn't consider, what never crossed his mind, was that the call from home wasn't competing with his problems. It was the reason they existed. By the time Caven reached the underground garage, the certainty he carried like armor had thinned into irritation. Irritation was manageable. It meant there was still someone to correct, still a lever to pull. He slid into the driver's seat of his car, shut the door, and sat there longer than necessary, phone resting in his palm. He dialed the number of a board member he'd known for years. Not an investor, not legal. Someone personal. Someone who used to call him for advice. The line rang twice before connecting. "Hey," the man said. His voice was cautious, measured. Caven leaned back. "I'm hearing some strange things. I assume this is just internal confusion." There was a pause on the other end. Not hesitation. Calculation. "It's not confusion," the man said carefully. "It's clarification." Caven frowned. Clarification of what? Of roles. The word landed wrong. Caven sat forward, his grip tightening. "You're going to have to explain that." Another pause. Then, a quiet exhale. "Some documents surfaced this morning, old ones, legally clean. They raised questions no one had asked before." Caven felt a flicker of annoyance. "I've signed thousands of documents. That doesn't change operational authority." "It does," the man replied, "when authority was never where we thought it was." The call ended politely. Too politely. No argument, no reassurance. Just distance. Caven stared ahead, his reflection faint against the dark windshield. For the first time, a thought crept in uninvited. Not fear, not doubt, oversight. He replayed the last few months in his mind, searching for the moment something slipped. The contracts Naira insisted he review when he was tired. The meetings she attended without speaking. The financial summaries she reorganized, streamlined, simplified for him. He had praised her efficiency without looking closely at what she'd changed. At the time, it felt convenient. Now, convenience felt expensive. His phone vibrated again. Another message from legal. Another notification that didn't ask permission. The language was precise, final, written by people who already knew the outcome. Caven started the engine, the sound grounding him. He told himself this was temporary. A pause. A recalibration. Systems didn't just reassign power overnight. People didn't lose influence without a fight. Yet every signal suggested the same truth. The fight had already happened. He just hadn't been invited. He pulled out of the garage and into traffic, the city moving around him as it always had, indifferent to his confusion. His phone buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't work. It was Naira again. He let it ring. Then, against his better judgment, he answered. "Caven," she said, her voice even, unhurried. "You're on your way home, yes?" "I'm busy," he replied. "We'll talk later." "No," Naira said gently. "We won't." There was no accusation in her tone, no demand, just certainty. Caven tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "What is this about?" There was a pause, brief but deliberate. "About clarity," she said, "and timing." The line went dead. Caven drove the rest of the way in silence, the city lights blurring past him. Something had shifted. He knew that now. Not abruptly, not violently, quietly, thoroughly. By the time he reached the penthouse, the certainty he'd relied on for years no longer felt like strength. It felt like a delay. The penthouse was quiet when Khyven stepped inside. Not the comfortable stillness he associated with late evenings, but something sharper, deliberate. The kind of quiet that didn't exist by accident. Naira was already seated at the glass table. She hadn't turned on the overhead lights. The room was lit just enough for clarity, not comfort. A single folder lay centered between them, aligned carefully with the edge of the table, as though its placement had been measured. Khyven loosened his tie as he approached, irritation flaring again, familiar and welcome. Irritation meant normalcy. It meant this was still a conversation he could steer. "What is this?" he asked, gesturing toward the folder. Naira didn't answer immediately. She looked at him the way she had learned to over time, without urgency, without apology. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, low, and certain. "Sit." The word landed softly, but it wasn't a request. Khyven laughed under his breath as he pulled out the chair. "You're choosing a strange moment for this." Naira slid the folder across the glass. "Sign it." No explanation followed, no framing, no emotional preface. The words were complete on their own. Khyven opened the folder slowly, already smiling. Divorce papers, standard language, predictable structure. He leaned back in his chair, amusement settling easily into place. "You really think this is how it ends?" he said. "You walking out with half my life?" Naira met his eyes. "I'm walking out with what's mine." The confidence in her voice unsettled him, not because it was loud, but because it didn't waver. Khyven shook his head, the smile widening as if to reclaim the upper ground. "You don't own anything, Naira." The room held the words without reacting to them. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. Naira didn't look at it. Khyven did. Then his own phone vibrated in his pocket. Once, twice. He ignored it, keeping his gaze fixed on her, convinced that whatever interruption waited could not matter more than proving his point. That decision settled into place like a lock turning. Naira folded her hands neatly on the table. "You've always mistaken proximity for ownership," she said, "and silence for absence." Khyven scoffed. "You lived comfortably because of me. I lived efficiently," Naira replied. "There's a difference." Another vibration. This time Khyven felt it even without touching the phone, a low insistence that refused to disappear. His confidence shifted slightly, just enough to notice. Naira stood, gathering the folder she'd already placed before him, as though she'd expected this pause. "You're laughing," she continued calmly, "because you think this conversation is symbolic." Khyven looked up at her. "Isn't it?" "No," she said. "It's procedural." For the first time that evening, Khyven didn't laugh. He reached for his phone at last, glancing at the screen. Missed calls, messages stacking faster than he could read them. Names he recognized immediately, names that didn't usually repeat themselves. Naira watched him without satisfaction, without urgency. "This," she said, tapping the folder lightly, "is simply the part where you catch up." Khyven didn't sit back down. He remained standing, phone in his hand now, eyes moving too quickly across the screen for comprehension. Messages overlapped, notifications stacked. Each vibration carried the same message without spelling it out. Decisions were being made without him. Naira watched quietly. She didn't interrupt his reading. She didn't explain. She had learned long ago that explanations often comfort the wrong person. "You did something," Khyven said at last. Not accusing, assessing. Naira tilted her head slightly. "I prepared." He let out a short laugh, sharp and humorless. Prepared for what? For today. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. Khyven looked at her as though seeing her fully for the first time, not as an extension of his life, not as a presence in his home, but as someone separate, someone deliberate. "You think this changes anything?" he said, forcing steadiness back into his voice. "You think paperwork makes you powerful?" Naira stepped closer to the table, resting her fingertips lightly against the glass. "Paper doesn't create power. she said. It records it. He shook his head, pacing once before stopping again. You stayed quiet for years. Yes. You never challenged me. No. Then why now? Naira met his gaze. Because you stopped being careful. The words landed without cruelty. They didn't need it. She reached into the folder and removed a single page, sliding it toward him. Not the signature line. The header, dates, names, structures he recognized but had never studied closely. You trusted me to manage details, she continued. You trusted me to simplify. You trusted me not to ask questions when you were tired. Caven stared at the page, a faint tension forming at the base of his throat. You wouldn't. I didn't have to, Naira replied. You agreed. His phone vibrated again. He didn't check it this time. By the time he laughed, the sound lacked confidence. You really think you've won? Naira considered the word carefully before answering. This isn't about winning. Then, what is it about? Understanding, she said. You believed I was quiet because I needed you. I was quiet because I was learning. The room settled into stillness again, but this time Caven felt it fully. The shift was complete now. Not dramatic, not announced, just final. Naira picked up her coat, moving toward the door without haste. Sign when you're ready, she said. Or don't. Either way, the outcome is the same. She paused once, her hand resting briefly on the doorframe. If you're listening to this story and you recognize this moment, she added calmly, remember this, power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits until it no longer needs permission. Sometimes it waits until it no longer needs permission. The door closed behind her. Caven stood alone in the penthouse, phone silent now, the glass table reflecting a future he hadn't seen coming. If you enjoy watching power change hands quietly, subscribe to Midnight Story Vault. Naira noticed the name because it appeared where it shouldn't have. Caven's phone lay on the kitchen counter, face up, vibrating lightly against the stone. He had stepped away to take a call on his other line, distracted, impatient, already halfway out of the room. Naira hadn't been looking for anything. She was pouring tea, her movements unhurried, her mind elsewhere. The screen lit again. Mireya Kane. The message preview disappeared before Naira could read more than the first line, but she didn't need to. The name lingered in her mind, unfamiliar and oddly confident, as if it expected to be recognized. When Caven returned, Naira lifted her cup and asked casually,
Who's Mireya Kane?
Publicist, new firm.
She texts late, then you should be more careful.
Who's Mireya? He didn't stop walking. Publicist, he said, too quickly. New firm. Naira nodded. She texts late. Caven waved a dismissive hand. That's how media people work. The conversation ended there because Caven assumed it had. He always did. Later that night, when he fell asleep without turning his phone face down, Naira didn't touch it. She didn't need access. Notifications told their own story when someone was careless enough to let them. Hotel confirmations, schedule changes, a familiarity in tone that didn't belong to professional boundaries. Naira lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling none of the chaos she might have expected. No racing heart, no disbelief, only clarity settling into place. By morning, Caven was already gone. A note on the counter read, "Back late. Don't wait up." Naira smiled faintly. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She opened her laptop instead, reviewing files she'd already organized weeks earlier, accounts she'd already separated, structures she'd quietly refined while Caven praised her for being efficient. When Caven returned that evening, he found her at the dining table with papers spread neatly before her. "Still working?" he asked, loosening his cufflinks. "Always," Naira replied. He glanced at the documents without interest. "You don't have to handle all that." "I know," she said calmly, "but I prefer to understand what I'm connected to." Caven smiled, satisfied, mistaking preparation for dependence. Naira watched him walk away, the name Maria Kane steady in her mind, not as a wound, but as confirmation. Because betrayal hadn't started the work. It had only confirmed the timing. And as Naira closed her laptop, she understood something Caven never had. When someone stops reacting and starts organizing, the outcome is already decided. Would you confront? Or would you let them destroy themselves first? Naira's days began to take on a new rhythm after that. Not outwardly. Nothing visible changed. She still joined Caven for breakfast when their schedules aligned. Still asked neutral questions about his meetings. Still listened when he spoke, nodding at the right moments, offering nothing that could be mistaken for suspicion. But underneath that calm surface, she worked with precision. She started with the accounts Caven barely glanced at anymore, the ones he had signed off on years ago and never revisited. Naira reviewed every line, every clause, every cross-reference. She reorganized payment structures, updated reporting flows, and ensured that access followed documentation rather than habit. When Caven noticed the changes, he barely reacted. "You're moving things around again?" he asked one evening, skimming an email summary she had forwarded. "Cleaning it up," Naira replied. "It was inefficient." Caven laughed. "That's why I married you. You love details." Naira smiled. Details love consistency. He didn't hear the implication. As days passed, Maria's name surfaced more often, never directly, never openly. Late nights, sudden trips, conversations that stopped when Naira entered the room. Caven assumed discretion was enough to protect him. He mistook Naira's lack of confrontation for lack of awareness. One afternoon, Caven glanced over her shoulder as she reviewed documents. "You don't need to worry about all that," he said. "I've got it handled." Naira didn't look up. "I know you do." The response satisfied him. It always did. What Caven never asked was why she had stopped asking questions, why she no longer reacted to his absences, why her tone remained steady no matter how careless he became. Silence, to him, meant comfort. It meant permission. Naira used it as cover. By the time Caven realized she was no longer waiting for reassurance, the structure around him had already shifted. Decisions no longer depended on his mood or availability. Processes moved forward without needing his signature in real time. He felt it vaguely, like resistance where there had once been ease. "You've been quiet lately," he remarked one night, pouring himself a drink. Naira met his gaze. "So have you." He smiled, assuming control still sat comfortably in his hands. It didn't occur to him that calm can be more unsettling than anger, or that when someone stops arguing, it often means they've found a better strategy. In relationships and professional environments alike, people often reveal more through patterns than confessions. Consistent preparation, financial awareness, and personal boundaries aren't reactions to betrayal. They are safeguards. When calm replaces confrontation, it doesn't always signal acceptance. Sometimes it signals readiness. Caven started noticing the quiet, the way people notice a change in weather, too late to stop it, too early to understand it. Naira no longer asked where he was going. She no longer reminded him of dinners or commented when he came home later than promised. At first, he found it freeing. "You're being easy lately," he said one morning, adjusting his watch as she handed him his coffee. Naira met his eyes briefly. "I'm being clear." He laughed. "About what?" "About what I need to manage," she replied. The answer felt harmless, and Caven accepted it as such. He always had. What he didn't see was how her calm had begun to alter the atmosphere around him. Assistants responded to Naira's emails first. Financial summaries arrived with her annotations highlighted. Meetings he assumed were informal suddenly required confirmations he hadn't authorized. One afternoon, he confronted her lightly, leaning against the doorway of her office. "You've been busy," he said. "Almost like you're running things." Naira didn't smile. "I've always been running things. You just didn't notice." The comment lingered longer than he expected. Caven waved it off. "You worry too much." "I don't worry," Naira said. "I prepare." Her tone was neutral, but something in it made him uncomfortable. Not threatened, yet, but aware. He began to feel watched, not in a suspicious way, but in the way one feels observed by someone who has already drawn conclusions. That evening, as he dressed for another late dinner, he caught her reflection in the mirror. "You're not coming?" he asked. "No," she said. "I have work." He hesitated. "You used to ask who I was meeting." Naira closed her laptop slowly. "I used to need context. And now I have enough." Caven frowned, irritation flickering. "You sound like you're accusing me of something." Naira looked at him calmly. "If I were accusing you, you'd know." He left unsettled, not because she was angry, but because she wasn't. Calm, he realized, could be more disruptive than confrontation. It left no emotion to manage, no argument to win. Later that night, Caven stared at his phone, considering whether to explain himself, whether to regain ground through reassurance. He chose neither. Naira, meanwhile, reviewed another finalized document, her focus steady, her decisions already made. In personal and professional dynamics, composure often signals more than emotional restraint. When someone becomes calm after periods of engagement, it can indicate clarity rather than compliance. Consistent behavior, measured responses, and quiet preparation frequently reflect a shift from dependence to independence, one that changes outcomes without requiring permission. Caven underestimated silence because it didn't demand anything from him. He mistook Naira's composure for passivity, her restraint for uncertainty. In his mind, if she truly knew, she would react. She would accuse. She would cry, argue, demand explanations. That was how conflict worked. That was how leverage was created. Naira did none of those things. Instead, she continued as she always had, measured, observant, consistent. She attended events at his side when necessary. She smiled at the right moments. She spoke when spoken to and withdrew when conversation offered no value. To Caven, this looked like compliance. One evening, as they sat across from each other finishing dinner, Caven broke the silence with a casual tone. "You're taking this whole independence phase pretty well," he said. "Most people would be more curious." Naira set her glass down. "Curiosity requires uncertainty." He smirked. "And you're certain of what, exactly?" "That I don't need to compete for honesty," she replied. Caven leaned back in his chair, amused. "You always overthink." Naira met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "You always underestimate." The words didn't register fully at first. Caven dismissed them the way he dismissed most things that didn't flatter his confidence. He stood, checking his watch. "I'll be late," he said. "Don't wait up." "I won't," Naira answered. He paused, something about her response unsettling him, but he brushed it aside and left. Alone again, Naira gathered the documents she'd been reviewing and placed them into a folder already labeled and dated. Each step she had taken connected seamlessly to the last. Nothing rushed, nothing emotional, just deliberate movement forward. Caven returned after midnight, expecting to find her asleep. Instead, he found the dining table cleared, the house orderly, untouched by tension. "You're really not bothered," he said, almost to himself. Naira looked up from her work. "I moved past that." He frowned. "Past what?" "Needing you to confirm what I already know." Caven didn't argue. He didn't confess. He didn't even deny it. He simply nodded, comforted by the absence of confrontation. That was his final mistake. Because calm is often misread as surrender, when in truth it can signal completion. People who mistake composure for ignorance frequently expose themselves further, believing they remain unseen. In reality, focus replaces emotion long before outcomes change. And by the time awareness arrives, decisions are no longer pending. Naira heard the elevator before the doorbell. She was seated in the living room, a slim tablet resting on her knee, reviewing a set of confirmations she had already memorized. The penthouse was quiet in the way it had become quiet lately, orderly, intentional, free of urgency. When the soft chime announced a visitor, Naira didn't look surprised. She stood, smoothing the sleeve of her blouse, and walked toward the door at an unhurried pace. The knock came just as her hand reached the handle. Naira opened the door to find Mireya Kane standing in the hallway, her confidence faltering the instant their eyes met. "Oh," Mireya said, blinking. Caven said. Naira smiled politely. "That I wasn't home?" Mireya hesitated, color rising to her cheeks. "He said you were out of town." Naira stepped aside slightly, leaving the doorway open. "You should come in. It's better we speak clearly." Mireya glanced behind her, uncertain, then stepped inside. The door closed softly behind her, the sound final without being forceful. "This must look strange," Mireya said quickly. "I work with Caven, public relations. We had a meeting at 8 in the evening?" Naira asked lightly. "On a day he cancelled his board briefing." Mireya's composure slipped. "He said the schedule changed." Naira nodded. "It often does." They stood facing each other, the distance between them precise. Mireya looked around the penthouse, taking in the space with the awe of someone who believed they were temporary, invited, chosen. "I didn't know," Mireya said, quieter now. "He told me things were settled." Naira met her gaze. "He told you what made it easier to arrive." The elevator chimed again. Footsteps followed. Caven entered mid-conversation, his voice already forming words that died the moment he saw them together. "What's going on?" he asked, the question too sharp, too late. Mireya turned to him. "You said she wasn't here." Caven's eyes moved to Naira, irritation flickering. "Naira, this isn't necessary." Naira finished calmly. "No, but it is accurate." Mireya's expression tightened. "You said you were separated." Caven exhaled sharply. "We are." Naira didn't raise her voice. "We are not." The silence that followed pressed in around them. Mireya took a step back. "I don't want to be here." Naira nodded. "I understand." Caven turned toward Naira, anger rising. "You don't get to decide who comes into my home." Naira looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time, there was no familiarity in her expression. "Watch me," she said. She tapped her phone once. Footsteps approached from down the corridor. Security. Mireya's eyes widened. "Caven?" He didn't answer. He was staring at Naira, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the authority now standing in front of him. Naira gestured gently toward the door. "You should go." Mireya didn't argue. She left quickly, dignity salvaged but illusions broken. Caven turned on Naira the moment the door closed. "What did you just do?" Naira met his fury with stillness. "I clarified boundaries. Because public confidence often relies on private assumptions, and when those assumptions are corrected in real time, authority shifts visibly. In situations involving power, the person who controls access, not volume, sets the outcome, and clarity delivered without hostility is often the most decisive form of control." Caven recovered his voice first. Anger usually did that for him. "You had no right," he said, stepping closer. "You embarrassed me." Naira didn't move. "You embarrassed yourself when you started lying to everyone involved." His jaw tightened. "This is my house." Naira turned slightly, her gaze shifting past him toward the hallway. "Is it?" Caven followed her line of sight, just as two members of security came into view. They stopped several steps behind her, posture straight, expressions neutral. Caven scoffed. "What is this supposed to be?" Naira didn't answer immediately. She waited, allowing the moment to settle. Then she spoke, her voice even. "You're dismissed," she said. Caven laughed sharply. "To them? You don't give them orders." The taller guard met Naira's eyes briefly and nodded. "We'll wait outside, ma'am," he said. "Ma'am." The word hit Caven harder than shouting would have. He turned to the guards, irritation flaring into disbelief. "Hold on," he said. "I didn't authorize anything." The guard's tone remained professional. "Our instructions were updated this morning." Caven looked back at Naira. "Updated by who?" Naira folded her arms loosely. "By the person listed as primary on the contract." Caven shook his head. "That's not possible." Naira tilted her head slightly. "It is when documents are reviewed instead of assumed." The guards stepped back, giving space but not leaving entirely. Caven felt it then, not fear, not panic, but displacement, the subtle awareness that he was no longer the reference point in his own space. "You think this proves something?" he said. "Hiring loyalty doesn't equal ownership." Naira walked past him, her steps measured, stopping near the window overlooking the city. "Ownership is written," she replied. "Loyalty is assigned." He followed her, lowering his voice. "You're making a mistake." Naira turned. "No, I'm correcting one." She reached for her phone and scrolled briefly. "Security reports to the property manager. The property manager answers to the holding entity. The holding entity answers to the controlling signature." She met his eyes. "Mine?" Caven searched her face for triumph, for cruelty, for any sign that this was personal. He found none. "You planned this," he said quietly. "I prepared," Naira replied. "There's a difference." The guards cleared their throats politely, reminding Caven of their presence without challenging him. The message was unmistakable. For the first time since he'd bought the penthouse, Caven realized the space no longer bent around him. It simply existed, structured, orderly, and indifferent to his expectations. In systems governed by contracts rather than emotion, authority responds to clarity, not confidence. When roles are defined on paper, behavior adjusts accordingly. Control doesn't vanish. Suddenly, it transfers to whoever understands how responsibility is documented and enforced. Caven stayed where he was after the guard stepped away, his eyes fixed on Naira as though the answers might rearrange themselves if he looked long enough. "You changed something," he said. "Recently." Naira returned to the table and sat, crossing one leg over the other with quiet ease. "Not recently." Caven frowned. "Then when?" She considered the question. "Gradually." He shook his head, irritation sharpening. "That doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," Naira replied. "It means nothing happened all at once." She opened the folder still resting on the glass table and slid a section toward him. Not the dramatic pages, not the final lines. The middle. The parts most people skim. "Do you remember this?" she asked. Caven glanced down. The heading looked familiar. He recognized the format, the font, the legal language he had trusted to others for years. "It's a routine amendment," he said dismissively. "Administrative." Naira nodded. "That's why you signed it." His eyes moved faster now, scanning. "This just updates reporting structure." "Yes." "And oversight." "Yes." "And assigns." He stopped, rereading the line more carefully. His jaw tightened. "This assigns authority." Naira's voice remained calm. "It clarifies it." "You didn't tell me," he snapped. "I sent it to you," she replied. "You approved it." "I didn't read it." "That," Naira said quietly, "is not my responsibility." Caven pushed the paper away. "You had no reason to do this." "I had several," Naira said. "I just didn't need permission to act on them." He stood abruptly, pacing once before turning back to her. "So every little change, every adjustment, I thought you were just helping." "I was," she said, "helping the structure make sense." Caven let out a short breath. "You let me believe nothing had changed." Naira looked up at him. "I let you believe what you assumed." The words settled between them, heavier than accusation. "All this time," he said, his voice lower now, "you were shifting things." Naira closed the folder. "I was aligning them." He laughed once, strained. "You waited until now to show me." "No," she corrected. "You waited until now to notice." Silence followed, thick but controlled. Caven stared at the documents as if they might rewrite themselves under his gaze. "You think this makes you untouchable," he said. Naira stood. "I think it makes me protected." He scoffed. "From me?" "From chaos," she replied. "From assumption. From carelessness." She gathered the folder and placed it back exactly where it had been before. The movement felt ceremonial without being dramatic. "You always believed authority came from presence," Naira continued. "I understood it comes from preparation." Caven didn't answer. He couldn't. The realization had reached him fully now, not as shock, but as recognition. He had built his confidence on speed, on trust, on habit. Naira had built hers on review, structure, and patience. In professional and personal arrangements alike, documents don't change outcomes by themselves. Attention does. When agreements are treated casually, they become opportunities for misalignment. Responsibility doesn't vanish because it's delegated. It settles with whoever takes the time to understand it. Perfect. Caven stood in the center of the living room, looking around as though the walls had shifted while he wasn't watching. The penthouse was unchanged. The furniture remained where it had always been. The art he'd selected still lined the walls. The view beyond the windows stretched across the city exactly as it had the night before. Yet something fundamental had altered, and he felt it with every breath. "This is still my home," he said finally, the words sounding more like reassurance than assertion. Naira moved past him toward the bar, pouring herself a glass of water. "You live here," she replied. "That doesn't make it yours." Caven turned sharply. "I paid for this place." Naira took a measured sip. "You funded it." He stared at her. "That's the same thing." "No," she said calmly. "It isn't." She set the glass down and reached for her phone, tapping once. A moment later, a soft knock echoed through the space. One of the guards stepped inside, posture formal. "Yes, ma'am?" Caven felt the word land again, unmistakable this time. "Please ensure Mr. Holt's access is limited to the private quarters," Naira said. "The study and office spaces are no longer shared." The guard nodded. "Understood." Caven took a step forward. "You can't do that." The guard hesitated, glancing between them. Naira spoke without raising her voice. "You can—" The guard met Caven's eyes apologetically. "Those are the current instructions, sir." "Sir, not Mr. Holt." Caven let out a breath through his teeth. "This is ridiculous." Naira faced him fully now. "This is structure." He gestured around the room. "You're telling me I don't even control my own house?" "I'm telling you," Naira said, "that control follows accountability." He shook his head. "You're enjoying this?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her tone was even. "I'm correcting what I allowed to go unchecked." Caven lowered his voice. "You could have warned me." "I did," Naira replied. "Every time I asked you to review what you signed." Silence settled again, heavier this time. Caven walked slowly toward the window, placing his hand against the glass. The city beyond it felt distant now, like a promise he no longer fully owned. "So this is it," he said quietly. "I don't even have authority in my own space." Naira stood a few steps behind him. "Authority isn't claimed by habit, it's maintained through responsibility." He turned toward her, anger dulled into something closer to disbelief. "You waited until I felt safe." Naira shook her head. "You waited until you felt entitled." She moved toward the hallway, her footsteps steady. "I'll be in my office. Please don't enter it." Caven watched her go, the sound of her steps fading, replaced by the quiet hum of a home that no longer adjusted itself to his presence. When personal and professional boundaries are formalized, spaces stop responding to assumption and start responding to structure. Ownership is not about proximity or familiarity, it's about clarity of responsibility. When roles change on paper, behavior follows, often before emotions can catch up. The penthouse felt smaller that night. Caven noticed it as he stood outside Naira's office door, his hand hovering just short of the handle. The guard's earlier instruction echoed in his mind, "Please don't enter it." And for the first time, he obeyed without argument. Control had left him exhausted, and exhaustion stripped confidence down to its truth. "Naira," he called softly. There was no answer at first. Then the door opened a fraction. "Yes?" she said. Caven stepped back instinctively, as though he needed space to speak. "We need to talk." Naira studied him for a moment before opening the door fully. She didn't invite him in. She didn't block him either. She simply waited. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," Caven said, running a hand through his hair. "You know that?" Naira folded her arms loosely. "I know how it went." He exhaled sharply. I didn't think you'd actually... He stopped, searching for a word that didn't sound like surrender. I didn't think you'd go this far. You're not used to consequences arriving quietly, Naira replied. Caven looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger, not arrogance. Something thinner. I need you to stop, he said. Just pause everything. We can talk to the board, to legal. We can straighten this out. Naira shook her head. You're asking for relief, not resolution. His jaw tightened. I built all of this, and I maintained it, she said calmly. He took a step closer. I made a mistake. Naira met his eyes. You made several, repeatedly. That doesn't mean you erase me, he said, voice rising slightly. I'm still here. I know, Naira said. That's why this is hard. Caven hesitated, then lowered his voice. I don't want to lose everything. Naira didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer, but no less steady. You're afraid of loss. That isn't the same as remorse. The distinction settled between them, unmistakable. In moments of crisis, people often confuse fear with accountability. Wanting consequences to stop is not the same as understanding why they began. True repair requires acknowledgement, not negotiation, and urgency without responsibility rarely leads to change. Naira stepped aside and allowed Caven into the office, not as an invitation, but as closure. The room was orderly, intentional, free of anything personal. It looked like a place designed for decisions, not comfort. Caven noticed. You moved everything, he said quietly. I kept what mattered, Naira replied. He stood near the desk, unsure where to place himself. You weren't always like this, he said. You used to look at me like I was... Enough. Naira rested her hands lightly on the back of her chair. I did. For a long time. His voice softened, sensing the opening. Then why are you doing this? Because loving someone doesn't mean accepting everything they become, she said. Caven swallowed. I loved you. Naira nodded once. I know. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. You don't say it back, he said. I don't say it now, she corrected. I say it in the past. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. We were good once. You remember that? I remember choosing you, Naira replied. Every day. Even when you stopped choosing me. Caven's shoulders sagged slightly. I didn't think you'd leave. That's because you thought love meant permanence, she said. I learned it means honesty. He shook his head. You could have fought for us. I did, Naira said quietly. You just didn't notice because it wasn't loud. Silence stretched between them, not tense, but reflective. Caven looked around the room again, then back at her. So this is it, he said. You acknowledge what we had, and still walk away. Yes, Naira replied. Because remembering love doesn't require repeating harm. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. You're not cold. No, she said. I'm finished. That realization seemed to land deeper than anger ever could. Healthy separation often involves honoring what once existed without allowing it to justify ongoing damage. Recognizing past connection does not obligate present compromise, and clarity about what no longer works is not cruelty. It is responsibility to oneself. Caven stood in the doorway as though leaving required permission he no longer had. His voice, when he spoke again, had lost its edge. If I change, he said. If I fix it. Naira didn't answer right away. She watched him carefully, not with suspicion, but with recognition. She had seen this version of him before, appearing only when something valuable was slipping away. Change doesn't begin with panic, she said. And fixing isn't something you request when consequences arrive. He took a step forward, stopping short of her desk. Just tell me what you want. Naira shook her head slowly. That's the problem. You still think this is a negotiation. His expression tightened. I'm asking for another chance. No, Naira replied. You're asking for another delay. The words landed gently but firmly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Caven exhaled, rubbing his hands together. You're really going to let this end? Yes, she said, without rewriting it. He looked down, then back up. I don't deserve this. Naira's voice softened slightly. You don't deserve punishment either. He frowned. Then, what is this? This, she said, is mercy. He scoffed, faintly. Doesn't feel like it. Mercy isn't comfort, Naira replied. It's clarity. She stepped closer, her tone calm, grounded. I'm not seeking to hurt you. I'm refusing to return to what already hurt me. Caven closed his eyes briefly, the weight of finality settling in. So there's nothing I can say. There's nothing you can undo, Naira said. That's different. He nodded slowly, as if understanding arrived late but fully formed. I thought if I showed you how much I need you. Naira met his gaze. Needing someone isn't the same as respecting them. The silence that followed felt complete, not unresolved. Caven turned toward the door. Goodbye, Naira. She watched him go. Take care of yourself. The door closed softly behind him, and for the first time that evening, Naira exhaled fully. Mercy is often mistaken for reunion, but the two are not interchangeable. Choosing not to continue harm is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of responsibility. When boundaries are maintained with clarity, endings can occur without malice, allowing growth without reopening wounds. Caven moved fast. By morning, his version of events had already found an audience. Calls were returned, statements were drafted. Familiar voices appeared on screens, nodding as he spoke with practiced calm. He wore the expression people trusted, measured, reasonable, slightly wounded. I don't usually speak about personal matters, he said into a camera, hands folded. But when misinformation starts to spread, silence becomes irresponsible. Naira watched the clip from her office, volume low, her attention divided between the screen and the document open in front of her. She didn't flinch at the phrasing. She'd expected it. He's positioning himself as restrained, her assistant said quietly. Concerned. Cooperative, Naira nodded. That's his comfort zone. On screen, Caven continued. I've always respected Naira. She struggled with the pressures that come with public life. I tried to shield her. Shield. The word hung there, polished and convenient. Another interview followed, then another. Each one carried the same themes: concern, disappointment, sacrifice. He never raised his voice. He never attacked directly. He implied. She didn't understand the demands, he said elsewhere. I handled the business so she wouldn't have to. Naira closed the video and returned to her work. Later that afternoon, Caven called. You should respond, he said, voice smooth. This is getting ahead of you. Naira didn't look up. Ahead of me where? Public opinion matters, he said. People believe what they hear first. Then let them hear you, Naira replied. He paused. You're really going to let me say all this? Yes. That's not smart, Caven said. They're painting you as unstable. Naira met his eyes across the desk. Are they? You know how this works, he pressed. If you don't correct it, it sticks. Naira leaned back. Only when it isn't contradicted by evidence. Caven's tone tightened. You think this ends well for you? I think it ends accurately, she said. He laughed softly. You always had faith in systems. I have faith in records, Naira replied. When the call ended, Naira's assistant hesitated. Should we prepare a statement, just in case? Naira shook her head. Not yet, but he's gaining traction. Let him, Naira said calmly. He's committing to a version. That evening, headlines multiplied. Friends reached out, cautious, uncertain. Naira answered none of them. She reviewed timelines instead. Quotes, public claims set neatly against documented actions. Caven went live again that night. I never imagined she'd take this approach, he said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. I just want fairness. Naira muted the screen. Fairness didn't require performance. It required patience. She had learned long ago that when someone controls the narrative too eagerly, they leave little room to adjust it later. Every statement became an anchor, every embellishment a liability. Naira closed her laptop and stood, her posture relaxed, her expression clear. Some people confuse restraint with weakness, believing silence invites defeat. In reality, silence can be strategic when facts are verifiable and time favors consistency. Public narratives built on implication often collapse under documentation, and allowing someone to speak freely can be the fastest way for inaccuracies to reveal themselves. Have you ever stayed quiet because you knew the truth would speak louder? Caven's confidence grew louder as Naira remained absent from the conversation. Morning shows invited him back. Business columns quoted him as a source. People who had once waited for Naira's guidance now repeated his words as if they were balanced conclusions. She was never involved in the operational side, Caven said during one interview, leaning forward slightly. I handled the responsibilities so she could focus on other things. The phrasing was deliberate, vague enough to sound considerate, sharp enough to diminish. Naira heard about it later from her assistant, who placed a transcript on her desk. He's escalating, the assistant said. Subtly but consistently, Naira skimmed the page, then set it aside. That's expected. You're not worried? No, Naira replied. He's getting comfortable. That comfort showed itself quickly. Caven began filling in details he should have left untouched. Numbers, dates, timelines. He spoke about decisions as though they had been unilateral, forgetting how often Naira had been present, how many approvals bore her signature. At a private luncheon, one of his associates pulled him aside. You sure you want to be this specific? The man asked quietly. Once you say it publicly, it's fixed. Caven smiled. There's nothing to contradict. Across the city, Naira reviewed another clip, this one from a panel discussion. Caven's voice carried clearly. I built the structure myself, he said. That's why the claims don't make sense. Naira paused the video and turned to her legal advisor. He's drawing lines, the advisor noted. Clear ones. Naira nodded. Good. Later that evening, Caven called again, irritation creeping into his tone. You're enjoying this, he said. Naira didn't deny it. I'm observing it. You think staying quiet makes you look dignified, he continued. It makes you look guilty. Only if guilt has nothing to answer to, Naira replied. He exhaled sharply. People are starting to ask questions. That's how accountability begins, Naira said. You could stop this, Caven insisted. One statement, one appearance. Naira smiled faintly. And interrupt your momentum. His silence stretched longer than usual. You think I'm digging myself in, he said. I think you're being thorough, Naira replied. After the call ended, Naira returned to her files. Every public claim Caven made now had a corresponding marker beside it. Notations, timestamps, cross-references. She didn't rush. There was no need. Friends called, urging her to speak up. Advisors suggested proactive messaging. Naira declined them all. He's explaining too much, she told her team. And explanations create trails. By the end of the week, Caven had repeated himself enough times that the inconsistencies began to surface on their own. A figure quoted differently in 2 interviews. A decision attributed solely to him that had been signed jointly. A timeline that no longer matched public filings. No one accused him yet. They simply started noticing. Naira watched the shift with measured calm. She understood something Caven didn't. Credibility isn't lost when challenged. It's lost when a story can't stay aligned with facts. In public disputes, speaking first doesn't guarantee authority. Consistency does. When individuals overextend their narrative, each added detail increases exposure to verification. Silence, when paired with documentation, allows contradictions to emerge naturally, without force or spectacle. The shift didn't announce itself. It never did. It arrived quietly, through questions that sounded polite and pauses that lingered a second too long. Caven felt it first during an interview he'd done dozens of times before. Same studio, same host, same opening pleasantries. But when the conversation turned toward timelines, the host leaned forward instead of back. You mentioned earlier this week that you handled all financial oversight personally, she said, her tone neutral. But filings from last year showed joint authorization. Can you clarify? Khyven smiled. Of course, I meant operationally. She nodded. So, not exclusively. The word landed cleanly, precisely. Across town, Naira watched the clip without expression. She didn't rewind. She didn't need to. The hesitation was enough. That afternoon, Khyven's phone rang more than usual. Advisors, acquaintances, people who spoke carefully now, asking questions they hadn't asked before. You're sure about the dates you gave? One asked. Yes, Khyven said, irritation creeping in. Why? No reason, the voice replied. Just making sure. Naira received a different kind of call. They're cross-checking, her legal advisor said, not aggressively. Yet, Naira closed a folder and set it aside. They will. Khyven called her that evening, his voice tighter than before. You're letting this get out of hand, he said. Naira leaned against the counter, listening. I'm letting it conclude. They're dissecting everything I've said, he snapped. You could stop this. You stopped yourself, Naira replied calmly. By adding details, he fell silent for a moment. You planned this. I trusted you to speak freely, Naira said. You did. Khyven exhaled sharply. You knew they'd catch it. I knew the truth wouldn't need editing. The next morning, a business columnist published a careful piece. No accusations, just observations. Quotes placed side by side. Statements compared across dates. Readers were invited to draw their own conclusions. Khyven read it twice. By midday, another outlet followed. Then another, each one gentler than the last, but together forming a pattern that was impossible to ignore. When Khyven went live again that evening, his tone had changed. I may have misspoken earlier, he said. There's been a lot of confusion. Naira muted the screen. Confusion wasn't the problem. Commitment was. Every word Khyven had offered freely now boxed him in. Each correction drew attention back to the original claim. Each clarification widened the gap between intent and record. Naira didn't celebrate. She didn't comment. She continued working as she had been all along, steady and precise. A message from her assistant appeared on her screen. They're requesting documents, it read, voluntarily. For now, Naira typed back a single response. Send what they ask for. That night, Khyven sat alone, scrolling through articles that quoted him accurately and still made him uneasy. He had spoken to be believed. He had spoken to stay ahead. Instead, he had spoken himself into a corner. Naira stood by the window of her office, the city below unchanged. She understood something Khyven was only beginning to grasp. Restraint isn't absence. It's selection. Choosing when not to speak can be as powerful as choosing when to speak clearly. When narratives are built on confidence rather than verification, they require constant maintenance. Truth does not. Allowing facts to surface on their own reduces the need for defense and exposes inconsistencies without confrontation. Silence, paired with preparation, often lets accountability arrive on schedule. Have you ever stayed quiet because you knew the truth would speak louder? The courtroom was quieter than Khyven expected. Not tense, not dramatic, just controlled, orderly, governed by procedure rather than personality. The kind of room where confidence had no currency unless it was supported by documentation. Khyven sat beside his legal team, posture straight, expression composed. He had worn this face for years, the one that suggested cooperation, reason, balance. Across the aisle, Naira sat alone, hands folded, eyes forward. She did not look at him. The judge entered without ceremony and took her seat. We'll begin with the financial disclosures, she said, voice even. Counsel, you may proceed. Naira's attorney stood, calm and precise. Your Honor, we'd like to submit the consolidated records for review. Folders were passed forward. Screens lit. Pages scrolled. Khyven leaned slightly toward his lawyer. This is routine, he murmured. They'll see it's standard. His lawyer didn't answer immediately. The judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the first set of documents. These entities, she said, are listed as holding vehicles for the primary operations. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Naira's attorney replied. They fund and govern the core structures. And the controlling interest? The judge asked. Caven's lawyer stood. Mr. Holt maintains operational authority. The judge raised a hand gently. I didn't ask about operations. I asked about ownership. Silence followed. Naira's attorney stepped forward again. The controlling interest belongs to Mrs. Solane. Caven turned sharply. That's not accurate. The judge looked up. Mr. Holt, you'll have an opportunity to respond. For now, let the record speak. More pages appeared on the screen. Signatures, dates, clear lines of authority. Caven recognized them immediately, not because they were unfamiliar, but because he had never given them proper attention. These amendments, the judge continued, were executed over a period of time. They weren't rushed. No, Your Honor, Naira's attorney said. They were reviewed, approved, and implemented gradually. Caven leaned back, pulse steady but tight. This wasn't confrontation. This wasn't accusation. This was structure doing what structure does. His lawyer whispered urgently, You signed these. I know that. Caven hissed back. But that doesn't mean... The judge looked up again. Mr. Holt, do you dispute the authenticity of your signature? Caven paused. No. Do you dispute the legality of the agreements? Another pause. No. The judge nodded once. Then we proceed. Caven glanced across the room. Naira still hadn't looked at him. As the review continued, it became clear what he had missed all along. No single document took anything from him. No sudden change stripped his authority. Each adjustment had been reasonable, defensible, proper. Together, they formed something final. The judge set the last folder down. The court recognizes Mrs. Solane as the controlling party in these entities. The words landed without drama, but Caven felt their weight settle fully for the first time. This wasn't retaliation, it was record, and as Caven sat there, listening to a system respond exactly as it was designed to, he understood something he hadn't grasped before. The moment Naira slid those papers across the table, she hadn't been taking revenge. She had been offering him the last moment before the record finished speaking for itself. In legal and professional environments, authority is determined by evidence rather than assertion. Courts do not respond to confidence or familiarity. They respond to documentation and process. When agreements are entered willingly and reviewed over time, they carry weight regardless of whether one party later regrets their attention to detail. The judge didn't rush. She turned another page, then another, moving through the records with the patience of someone who understood exactly what she was looking for. Caven watched her hands more than her face, noticing how little effort it took to dismantle years of assumption. These holdings, the judge said, tapping the page lightly, were used to fund multiple core operations. Yes, Your Honor, Naira's attorney replied. They were designed to protect continuity and oversight. And the signatory authority? The judge asked. Naira's attorney gestured to the screen. Mrs. Solane. Caven's lawyer rose quickly. Your Honor, operational leadership remained with Mr. Holt throughout. The judge looked up. Leadership is not ownership. The distinction landed cleanly, leaving no room for argument. Caven leaned forward, voice controlled but strained. Those companies were created for convenience. Convenience does not negate responsibility, the judge replied evenly. Especially when documentation is clear. She turned to another exhibit. These agreements assign decision rights, reporting obligations, and final authorization. Mr. Holt, do you deny reviewing these? Caven hesitated. I trusted my wife. The courtroom held its breath for half a second. The judge nodded slowly. Trust does not replace review. Naira's attorney stood again. Your Honor, these structures were not concealed. They were disclosed repeatedly, approved incrementally, and supported by independent counsel. The judge scanned the timeline. I see that. Caven's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently. Caven barely heard it. His attention was fixed on the screen as the judge continued. Mr. Holt, she said, you maintained public visibility. You led meetings. You spoke on behalf of the enterprise. But the record shows that authority to bind, redirect, and limit exposure resided elsewhere. She looked directly at him now. With your consent. Caven's mouth opened, then closed. Naira finally looked at him. Not with triumph, not with anger, with something quieter. Recognition. You let me handle what you didn't want to manage, she said softly, breaking courtroom protocol just enough to be heard. The judge allowed it. Caven swallowed. I didn't think. No, Naira said. You didn't. The judge raised a hand gently. Mrs. Soline's statement aligns with the record. She turned back to the documents. The court finds no evidence of misrepresentation. Authority was assigned lawfully. Ownership was acknowledged. Oversight was consistent. Caven leaned back, the fight draining from his posture. The realization came fully now. His influence had not been taken from him. It had been organized away from him, piece by piece, with his approval. This changes everything, his lawyer muttered. Caven stared ahead. No, he said quietly. It explains everything. Naira's attorney closed the folder. We ask the court to recognize the structure as binding. The judge nodded. It is recognized. The gavel didn't slam. It didn't need to. In systems governed by law, clarity outlasts charisma. Ownership is not inferred from visibility or effort. It is established through consent, documentation, and accountability. Delegating responsibility does not eliminate obligation, and trust without verification often leads to outcomes that feel sudden only because attention was absent. The court clerk called the next name. Mireya Kane. Caven's shoulders stiffened. Mireya stepped forward slowly, her posture careful, her expression composed in a way that suggested preparation rather than confidence. She took the seat, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed ahead. Miss Kane, the judge said, you understand you are under oath? Yes, Mireya replied. Her voice was steady but not rehearsed. Naira watched without expression. This was the one variable she hadn't directed, the only part of the record she hadn't authored herself. Naira's attorney approached first. Miss Kane, how long did you know Mr. Holt? Mireya hesitated, then answered, just over a year. And in what capacity? Initially professional, Mireya said. Public relations. Caven's jaw tightened. At what point did that change? The attorney asked. Mireya took a breath. When he told me his marriage was over, a quiet murmur passed through the room. Naira didn't move. Did Mr. Holt tell you Mrs. Soline was still living in the penthouse? The attorney continued. No, Mireya said. He said she had moved on. And did you believe him? Yes, Mireya answered. At first, Caven's lawyer stood. Objection. Relevance. The judge shook her head. Overruled. Continue. The attorney nodded. Miss Kane, were you ever aware that your relationship overlapped with Mr. Holt's marriage? Mireya looked directly at Caven for the first time. Not until I walked into the penthouse and saw her. The room fell still. Caven stared straight ahead, his face carefully neutral. What happened then? The attorney asked. She asked me to leave, Mireya said quietly. And security enforced it. Caven's lawyer rose again. Objection. That has no bearing on ownership. The judge lifted her hand. It bears on credibility. She turned back to Mireya. Miss Kane, did Mr. Holt ever instruct you on what to say publicly about your role? Mireya nodded once. Yes. And what did he ask? That I keep our relationship private, Mireya said. And that if asked, I describe my involvement as limited and professional. Naira exhaled slowly through her nose. Caven finally turned. That's not what I said. Mireya met his gaze. It's exactly what you said. The judge allowed the moment to settle before speaking again. Miss Kane, did Mr. Holt ever mention financial structures, ownership, or authority? Yes, Mireya replied. He said everything was his, that he made the final decisions. And did you ever see documentation supporting that claim? The judge asked. Mireya shook her head. No. Caven's lawyer leaned toward him urgently. Caven didn't respond. Naira's attorney stepped back. No further questions. The judge looked at Mireya. "You may step down." As Mireya left the stand, she passed Caven without looking at him. The silence left behind felt heavier than testimony. Caven sat still, understanding arriving in pieces he couldn't ignore anymore. Mireya hadn't been manipulated into testifying. She hadn't been coached. She had simply told the truth, and the truth had filled every gap he had tried to control with confidence. Naira remained composed, her focus forward. She understood what Caven was only now grasping. Systems collapse not because of enemies, but because of unchecked assumptions. When multiple accounts align independently, credibility shifts decisively. Courts rely on consistency across evidence, testimony, and record. When personal narratives diverge from documented behavior and third-party experience, credibility erodes naturally. Transparency does not require coordination, it requires accuracy. And when truth is shared from different angles, it becomes difficult to dismiss. Caven no longer tried to speak. He sat still as the judge reviewed the final set of documents, his earlier confidence replaced by something quieter and more unsettling: recognition. Not of defeat, but of sequence. Everything that was happening now had been set in motion long before he laughed at the papers Naira slid across the table. The judge looked up. "Mr. Holt," she said, "do you wish to respond before the court concludes?" Caven opened his mouth, then closed it. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgent, something defensive. Caven shook his head slightly. "No," he said at last. "I understand." The judge studied him for a moment. "Very well." She returned her attention to the bench. "The court finds that Mrs. Soline acted within her legal rights at every stage. There is no evidence of deception, coercion, or impropriety. Authority was reassigned through valid agreements, executed knowingly." She paused. "Any losses incurred by Mr. Holt resulted from his own representations." The words landed softly, but Caven felt their full weight. As the judge continued outlining the consequences: frozen assets pending review, limits placed on operational authority, formal oversight imposed, Caven stopped hearing individual phrases. His focus drifted instead to the memory of Naira standing across from him at the glass table. "Sign it." He had laughed. Not because he thought she was wrong, but because he thought she was powerless. Caven glanced at her now. Naira sat with the same posture she'd had that night. Calm, composed, finished. He leaned toward her slightly, lowering his voice. "You didn't do this to hurt me." Naira turned her head just enough to acknowledge him. "No, you could have waited," he said. "You could have let it collapse publicly." "I didn't want to," she replied. He swallowed. "Then why?" Naira held his gaze. "Because endings don't need cruelty to be final." The judge stood, signaling the close of proceedings. As the room began to empty, Caven remained seated for a moment longer, watching Naira gather her things. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. Only then did it settle fully. The opening scene, the contracts, the quiet authority, the calm instruction to sign, hadn't been revenge. It had been the last chance she gave him to understand before the system took over. Caven rose slowly, the space around him unfamiliar now. Not because he had lost everything, but because he had lost the illusion that he was ever the only one holding it together. Naira walked past him toward the exit. He spoke once more, his voice low. "I never saw it coming." Naira paused. "I know." She didn't add anything else. Because mercy isn't softness, and it isn't return. It's restraint applied before damage spreads further. When someone allows consequences to unfold without spectacle, it isn't weakness, it's discipline. In formal systems, accountability does not arrive as punishment. It arrives as process. When individuals are given opportunities to notice, correct, and engage responsibly, and choose not to, outcomes follow without malice. Recognizing mercy often happens only after it has passed, when clarity replaces entitlement and structure replaces assumption. Naira returned to the penthouse once more, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to leave it properly. The space greeted her without resistance. No tension. No reminders demanding attention. Just rooms that had held years of her life and no longer asked anything of her. She moved through them slowly, selecting only what belonged to her in the truest sense. Documents she had authored, books she had marked in the margins, a framed photo from a time before ambition blurred into entitlement. Caven stood near the doorway of the living room, watching. "You're really leaving all this," he said quietly, gesturing around them. "Most people would take more." Naira closed the box in her hands. "Most people confuse value with weight." He nodded, absorbing that. "You could keep the penthouse." "I don't want reminders," she replied. "I want space." She passed him on her way toward the door. He followed, stopping just short of her path. "You won," Caven said, not bitterly now, but plainly. Naira met his gaze. "I ended something that stopped being honest." "That's the same thing," he said. "No," Naira replied. "Winning requires someone to lose. This required me to leave." He frowned slightly. "So what now?" She considered the question. "Now I live without managing someone else's denial." Caven looked around again, as though seeing the penthouse for the first time. "I thought you wanted everything." Naira shook her head. "I wanted balance." She lifted the box and walked toward the elevator. Caven didn't follow this time. He stayed where he was, hands at his sides, awareness settling in without anywhere to go. As the doors closed, Naira exhaled, not in relief, but in completion. Leaving with dignity doesn't require proving strength through accumulation. It requires knowing when to disengage from spaces that no longer reflect who you are. Empowerment is often revealed not by what someone claims, but by what they choose not to carry forward when a chapter ends. Caven remained in the penthouse long after the elevator doors closed. The silence didn't accuse him. It didn't echo. It simply existed, steady and unresponsive, no longer shaped around his presence. He moved through the room slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, as if physical contact might return a sense of command that had quietly left him. He stopped in the study first. The desk was cleared. The shelves held only what he had chosen himself. No annotations in the margins, no organized summaries. The absence was unmistakable, not of things but of contribution. "She really did everything," he murmured. No one answered. His phone buzzed once, then went still. Messages he used to receive without effort now required replies he hadn't prepared. For the first time, there was no one to quietly redirect, clarify, or soften the consequences of his decisions. Later that evening, Caven sat alone at the dining table, where Naira had once spread documents with calm precision. "I thought you needed me," he said aloud, the words lingering without response. What he realized, slowly and without comfort, was that Naira had never needed him to function. She had needed him to participate honestly. When that ended, so did the partnership. Days passed. Meetings continued without him. Invitations stopped arriving. He still had resources, still had options, but none of them offered what awareness demanded. The story he had told himself for years no longer held. A friend called one afternoon, voice careful. "You okay?" Caven hesitated. "I'm seeing things clearly." "That's good," the voice replied. Caven wasn't sure it was. Clarity stripped away excuses. It replaced certainty with responsibility. There was no one left to blame, no system to lean on without contribution. He stood at the window one evening, city lights reflecting faintly against the glass. "She didn't take everything," he said quietly. "She left me with understanding." Understanding wasn't punishment. It wasn't loss in the traditional sense. It was the knowledge of where he had stopped listening. Growth often begins not with consequence, but with awareness. When support systems are removed, individuals are left to confront their own habits, assumptions, and blind spots. Accountability without resentment creates space for reflection, and reflection, while uncomfortable, is often the first step toward meaningful change. Naira chose a smaller place across town, not because she needed less, but because she wanted clarity. The apartment was quiet, filled with light that arrived without announcement and left without demand. Nothing there needed to be managed except her time. Weeks passed before she agreed to meet anyone new. The cafe was modest, unremarkable in every way that mattered. Naira arrived first, setting her bag down and ordering tea. When he approached, he didn't scan the room. He didn't look over her shoulder. He looked at her. "Naira?" he asked, offering a small, genuine smile. "Yes, I'm Elias," he said. "Thank you for meeting me." They sat without urgency. Conversation moved easily, not because it was charming, but because it wasn't strategic. He asked what she enjoyed working on now. He listened when she answered. When she paused, he didn't rush to fill the space. At one point, he smiled and said, "You don't explain yourself much." "I don't need to anymore," Naira replied. He nodded. "That makes sense." Later, when the conversation drifted toward boundaries, he didn't flinch. "I value independence," Naira said. "Not distance. Just balance." Elias considered that. "I don't need to be needed," he replied. "I prefer to be chosen." Naira smiled, not because it impressed her, but because it aligned. There were no promises made that day, no projections, no urgency to define what hadn't yet formed. When they stood to leave, he didn't reach for her hand automatically. "May I?" he asked instead. "Yes," she said. As they parted, Naira felt something she hadn't in years, not excitement sharpened by uncertainty, but steadiness without obligation. She walked home alone, content. Love, she understood now, wasn't built on control or sacrifice disguised as loyalty. It was built on mutual respect, on the ability to stand fully formed without shrinking or managing someone else's fragility. Choosing equality over intensity isn't settling. It's maturity. Healthy connection allows space for autonomy, consent, and shared responsibility. When relationships are grounded in respect rather than dependence, they support growth without erasing individuality, creating stability that doesn't require performance to sustain. Naira stood at the window of her new apartment as evening settled in, not watching the city for answers, but letting it exist without asking anything of her. The day had been full in a way that didn't demand recovery. Work completed, a message returned, a walk taken without checking the time. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Elias. "I enjoyed today." No expectations, just saying that. Naira smiled, typed a simple reply, and set the phone face down. Later that night, Cavan sat alone at a long table meant for many people. The chair across from him remained empty. He stared at a document he had already read twice, the margins clean, the language precise. There was nothing to argue with anymore. "I thought strength meant volume," he said to no one in particular. Turns out it meant patience. No one answered. There was nothing left to correct him. Naira had never raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. She had learned something early and held it quietly. When you prepare with care, confrontation becomes optional. The outcome doesn't rely on persuasion. It relies on alignment. Weeks earlier, when she slid the papers across the glass table, Cavan had laughed. He thought the moment was about defiance. It wasn't. It was about timing. The work had already been done. The systems were already in place. The record already knew the truth. Sweet revenge, Naira understood now, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand witnesses. It doesn't rush. It waits until it no longer needs permission. She hadn't sought to embarrass him. She hadn't tried to destroy him. She had simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own assumptions. And when those consequences arrived, they didn't shout. They followed procedure. The next morning, Naira met a friend for coffee. They sat in easy silence for a moment before the friend spoke. "You seem lighter," she said. Naira considered the word. "I'm clearer. You don't miss it." "I miss who I was before I started explaining myself," Naira replied. "Not the situation." Across town, Cavan cancelled another meeting he wasn't ready to attend. He picked up his phone, hovered over Naira's name, then set it down again. There was nothing left to request. Understanding had arrived, and it didn't negotiate. Naira walked home later that afternoon, unhurried. She passed places that once felt important and now felt neutral. That, she realized, was the truest marker of closure. Not anger, not relief, but indifference grounded in self-respect. That evening, she cooked for herself. Simple food. Clean kitchen. No one to manage, no one to anticipate. When her phone buzzed again, she answered without hesitation. "How was your day?" Elias asked. "Steady," Naira said. "Yours?" "Good," he replied. "I like how calm things feel around you." Naira paused, then said, "That's intentional." "I figured," he said, smiling through the line. She hung up and leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet settle, not as absence, but as presence. This is the lesson Naira carried forward, not as a warning, but as a practice. Preparation outlasts reaction. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not surrender. It's strategy. It gives truth the space it needs to stand on its own. And when truth stands without being pushed, it doesn't need applause. Sweet revenge isn't loud. It's prepared, and it begins long before confrontation. If this story reminded you that silence can be strategy, subscribe to Midnight Story Vault.